It is 5 p.m., so we can start our seminar. I will leave the floor immediately to Marina Teller, the chair of DL4T, to present our today's seminar.
Thank you, Frédéric. So good evening, everybody. I'm very pleased to welcome you today. We attend a seminar dedicated to artificial intelligence and market manipulation. And this is the 5th seminar on the DL4 Tech research program. This program deals with generalist topics and also concrete topics such as health, transport, finance, legal profession, and competition. Our research activities aim to answer 2 questions that are linked. What are the effects of AI on the law? And what should be the effects of the law on AI? And this questioning gives rise to multiple scientific projects which are conducted within a scientific chair entitled Economic Law and Artificial Intelligence, and within a Fablex, which is an applied research unit where our team and we work with students on a concrete topic. So today, this seminar is organized by Frédéric Marty, who is co-holder of the scientific chair. And I would like to warmly thank Frédéric. Frédéric Marty is an outstanding researcher. He has an extraordinary capacity for work, scientific qualities that we all know, and he is also known for his humility. Thanks for all of this, Frédéric. Thank you, Jessica. And the subject of this seminar is linked to a publication from the CIRANO Center by Nathalie de Marcellis-Warin, Eva Thelisson, Thierry Warin, and Frédéric Marty, him again. So Frédéric will present his co-authors and will explain the starting point of this publication. For my part, I would like to sincerely thank our speakers and attendees. We have already met in Montreal for Nathalie and Thierry, and through Zoom for Eva. I know your work, which I appreciate a lot, and I'm happy to share it with our team, with our student, with our PhD student tonight. So, Frédéric, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Marina, for your kind words. We can perhaps start not by the presentation, but just by some words of presentation or our colleagues in order mainly to present their research activities, their research center before starting the presentation. We can start, for instance, by, sorry, just mic to mute. We can start by Eva, and after we will go to Nathalie and Thierry for the CIRANO. So first, some words of Eva, about Eva and her lab, the IA Transparency Institute. Eva, if you want to present your activities.
Thank you very much. So hi everyone, my name is Eva Thelisson. So I'm very pleased to be here, and I would like to really thank everyone for the organization of this seminar. I'm a lawyer and I have a double background in law and economics, and my research is mainly focused on AI trustworthiness, AI governance, and concretely how to align the interests of all stakeholders and how to engage private company in business models that are sustainable, trustworthy, performant, and eco-responsible. So I co-founded the AI Transparency Institute 2 years ago. We are based in Switzerland. And basically, we really wanted to build a network of AI and machine learning experts working within interdisciplinary teams. So with philosophers, with ethicists, with lawyers, with economists on some specific projects. So tonight we will present one of the projects related to the quantification of AI trustworthiness. Thank you.
Thanks, Eva. Perhaps Thierry, I do not know if Nathalie is available. Nathalie has 2 different Zoom meetings in the same time. So perhaps Thierry, you will be responsible for the presentation of the CIRANO.
Well, it's a big deal. Thank you. So, well, it's a pleasure to be part of this Zoom. So good morning. We are in Montreal, so it's still morning time. So I'm Thierry Warin. I'm professor of data science at HEC Montreal. So what I do, I design algorithms and I play with big data, what we call big data. And so I come actually from a slightly different perspective from a lot of you, so more computer science in a way, with a domain in industrial organization or finance, market finance. So so Nathalie, I know Nathalie is listening to us right now, so I don't know whether she has time to jump in and I don't think so, but you will see Nathalie in a couple of minutes anyway. So CIRANO, it's a research center in Canada, in fact. So it serves as the economic council to the Quebec government in many ways. It's 280 researchers. So it's a pretty big research center in Canada. It's actually the second largest one. And CIRANO has a couple of focuses, and one of them is the Industrial Revolution 4.0. So it's really about what we are dealing with nowadays. So and we are a couple of people at CIRANO. So I'm just one of them actually. We are a couple of people at CIRANO dealing with these big changes for our societies and companies. Oh, here is Nathalie.
Oh, yes, thank you, Thierry, for the introduction. I didn't want to, sorry. So Nathalie de Marcellis-Warin, I am a co-author of this research, and I'm really happy to be with you today. As Thierry said, so I am the president of CIRANO, a research center in Montreal. And with my research and with another center on ethics and responsible AI, we work very specifically on this topic and applying that to a technological platform and the new ecosystem related to economical and technological platform could be really interesting. So thank you for having us today.
Thanks, Nathalie. If you want, we can start the presentation. I will share my screen and make the first part of the presentation with something like an English with a very strong French accent. So sorry by advance about this, my English. So I will share my screen. It's perfect. Is it okay for you?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. So we will speak today about artificial intelligence and market behavior manipulations. In fact, we will try to address a very topical issue in the economic literature, but also in the legal literature, about the relative perimeters of regulatory intervention. Is it better to intervene ex post, for instance, through competition law, or is it better fitted to intervene ex ante as a substitute or as a complement of an ex post intervention? So we try to apply this question on market manipulations oriented toward consumers on one hand, and market manipulations oriented toward competition on the second hand. So we will present in our first part some developments about the capacity to manipulate markets, to manipulate consumer through algorithms. And we try to describe in the second part how to use ex-ante tools in order to counteract, to limit these manipulations through the intervention of dedicated regulatory bodies, like the British, future British digital market units, like a competition authority. It will be a first way to address this question. A second way will be to empower consumer, that is to say, to promote the use of counter algorithm, something like an algorithmic fight, for instance. And the third way, the way that we want to stress is to use mechanism, scoring methods, index, in order to make algorithm more responsible. That is to say, to enhance the transparency, to enhance the accountability of algorithm, in order to something like to self-discipline firms because of reputation-related impacts or because of social responsibility of the firm. And that is to say, these different elements to make possible something like an ex-ante regulation of algorithm. So the research context, in 2 words. First, the interplay between algorithm on one hand and more precisely artificial intelligence-based algorithm with, on the other hand, legal and ethics dimensions. We do not equal legal dimension and ethic dimensions, but it is very important to insist on this interplay. All the ethics cannot be summed up to legal aspects, but in fact, we have to think about the different dimensions of compliance toward laws, but also compliance towards the expectations of investors or the different stakeholders of the firms, and so on. And the second debate, the second context, is related to our current debates in Europe with the digital market unit proposed by the British government just 1 week ago, and perhaps in something like now in 8 days, the future Digital Service Act and the Digital Market Act coming from the European Commission. But we can also relate this debate to the German adjustment of competition law that Oliver Budzinski spoke just, I think, 3 weeks ago in this seminar. So how to consider the way that consumer and perhaps competition can be manipulated by firms and can be manipulated by algorithm. We can provide 2 examples, 2 very recent examples coming from the US. The first one is a consent decree between the state of California, the Attorney General of California, and Apple. Why? Apple made a change in its algorithm, the algorithm that drive the processor, in order to cope with the difficulty induced by the battery of the iPhone. It was only a technical problem of life expectancy of the battery. How to deal with this problem is within an upgrade of the software to make the processor run slower, and by running slower, it was a tool to cope with this technical difficulty. But the consumer were not aware about this fact. Do you see my different slide?
I don't think so, Frédéric.
I think I will try to make. Is it okay here?
Oui.
Yes,
So,
it's okay.
yes. So the first type of manipulation was to provide a partial or an incomplete information to the consumer. You downgrade the quality of your service in order to hide a technical difficulty. We have a second example, an example which is related to Zoom, that is to say the platform on which we are, and a consent decree negotiated with the Federal Trade Commission just 1 month ago in the United States. In fact, the FTC, the Federal Trade Commissions, used our Section 5 of the FTC Act related to deceptive and unfair methods of competitions, and the FTC applied this Section 5 to Zoom. Why? Zoom made something like false statements, false communications about the security of its platform. The security in terms of cryptology and the security in terms of storage of the different recording. So what was the result? A consent decree, that is to say a negotiated procedure. Zoom will change its communication, and do not engage or do not produce any misleading information for the consumer about the real level of security of its service. The consumer, in fact, it's you and me, individual consumer, but also institutions like University, we are here, like hospitals, but also small and medium enterprise. That is to say, the consumer here can be a commercial partner. And what is very important, what is very interesting to see in that case, it's two dissenting opinions made by two FTC commissioners, Rebecca Slaughter on one hand, and Rohit Chopra on the second hand. What was the point of Rebecca Slaughter? Rebecca Slaughter underlined that Zoom succeeded in misleading the consumer. Why? Just because the consumer was more attached to apparent quality than real quality. That is to say, Zoom is a very nice platform to have search exchanges that we have now. Perhaps better than Teams, surely better than Google Meet and so on. But perhaps in terms of security, in terms of cryptology, the quality of the service is not the same. And the problem is that the consumer cannot assess this quality. We have some goods and services that we can assess the quality immediately. We have some goods or services that we can assess the quality ex post, after the consumption. It is something like an experience good. But the security of a platform is a credence good. That is to say, it's based on trust. I do not know ex ante if the service is a good quality in one. I do not know ex post if the security was a good one or a bad one, just because I cannot make a causality between my activity on Zoom and a problem in terms of privacy. So in fact, in that kind of credence good, the consumer cannot assess the service. And here, the risks are major. Just think about health services and so on. That is to say, it's an issue of privacy, an issue of security and so on. It will be an high-stake decision. That is to say, the risk is perhaps very limited, but the consequences for an individual, the consequences for a company can be very consequent. And for Rebecca Slaughter, just to make the promise to stop these practices is not enough. And more interesting for us even is the dissent of Rohit Chopra. Rohit Chopra said, okay, we have a problem in security. This problem in security has some consequences in terms of privacy, in terms of protection of personal data. But there is also a problem on competition. Why? Because when you say, I am the best, or I am good as my competitor are, I deliver bad information to the consumer. I have a service with a different level of quality, a vertical differentiation of their service, and I compete with unfair method. So, in fact, deceptions of the consumer distort the competition. We have an interplay between security, consumer protection, and finally, competition on the market. And we want to address this kind of issue. That is to say, how to detect, how to remedy, and how to prevent, in fact, this kind of damages. Damages in terms of security, damages in terms of privacy, damages in terms of consumer protection, damages to competition. And our research question, again, sorry for my English, is to see if ex-ante devices can help to limit this risk or to address these questions. So I will pass very quick on this point because I have already said that at the very beginning of the presentation. We will assess in our last parts how to cope with the difficulties through authorities, through consumers' reactions or countermeasures, or finally through the firms themselves and through their stakeholders. That is to say, what can be the self-assessment tool to implement? And it will be precisely the part in which Eva will present the work and the scoring methods of IA Transparency Institute. So I will start first with the risk for consumers and after with the risk for competition. For consumers, we can have three types of risk. The first risk is to use algorithms, to use manipulative strategies in order to narrow the space of the possible choice. That is to say, it is a damage in terms of freedom of choice. The second way to harm consumer is to manipulate his behavior. And we will see how using, or not to use, in fact, dark patterns in order to orient strategically consumer choice or to prevent the consumer to make a choice aligned, in fact, with his own interest, but not aligned with the firm's interest. And finally, we will see how to use algorithm, how to use predictions in order to distort not the transaction itself, but the conditions, the terms of the transactions. That is to say, to make something like an exploitative abuse against the consumer, to impose unbalanced contractual conditions. First, how to use algorithm and artificial intelligence in particular to distort predictions, to distort the liberty of choice of consumer. First, with artificial intelligence, we have a more and more accurate capacity to predict consumer choice. Why? Because the collection of data, because the capacity to analyze this data, and the capacity to propose solutions to the consumer. Why it is easier now than 10 years ago? because of the 4V of data: velocity, volume, variety, and veracity. The bigger you are, the broader are your activity, the higher your capacity to buy data, to collect data, the better will be your performance. In addition, you can acquire through mergers, through acquisitions, a lot of market players specialized to data analytics, to business intelligence. We spoke about killer acquisition, consolidating acquisition with Noraziba 3 weeks ago. It is exactly the same topic. You can see how Facebook brought companies like Onavo, like Google brought Looker and so on, in order to have this capacity to understand consumer behavior. You can also use algorithm to create irreversibility. It is a case very interesting on marketplace. When I go on Amazon, especially during the lockdown. It is an uncivic behavior. When you go on Amazon, we are on the model of shopping, then shipping. But try to imagine, if I bought cartridge for my printer, Amazon will be able to know that I will need a cartridge in, I do not know, 5 days, 10 days, and Amazon can ship first the cartridge, and I can send back if I don't want to buy, but I can keep this one. It is a model of shipping, then shopping. And it creates an irreversibility because it is costly for a consumer to send back the item, to buy another one on a shop, and so on. That is to say, if you want to, if you are able, to know by advance what the consumer will need, you can preempt, in fact, his consumption. So you see, you can not manipulate, but you can channel the choice of the consumer, and you can catch, in fact, its consumption. The third way to reduce this liberty of choice is something like self-preferencing. We spoke about self-preferencing with Oliver 3 weeks ago. It is exactly the same thing, but in terms of adoption of apps, in terms of adoption of complementary service in platforms. This example is provided by Esraki and Stuck in a working paper made last September, I think, for the EU Commission. The fact is to explain why a platform is better placed, is in a better position than an external competitor to impose an innovation. The platform can push the innovation toward its consumer, that is to say something like a nudge, and the platform can impede the capacity of an external competitor to propose this innovation to the consumer. It is something like a sludge. We will explain in the next slide what is the difference between a nudge and a sludge. Here, what are the different points, in fact? First, knowledge. Before accepting an innovation, before adopting an innovation, I must be aware about the existence of the innovation. I can know that this innovation will be available on the market through recommendation systems. Perhaps I am in a bubble filter, and only the platform can inform me about the availability of the innovation. So the platform can push its innovation and can impede the competitor's innovation. It is the same thing for persuasion. Perhaps I know that an innovation is available, but I'm not sure about its optimality for me. Again, with personalized targeting, the platform can push its product. Decisions, the platform can provide incentives, can manipulate recommendations, can create false recommendations sometimes, false opinions, can hinder the capacity of the opinion on the products, on the service of competitors to access me, and so on. Again, two last point, the implementation. It is perhaps more easier to adapt a complementary good in an ecosystem if this complementary good is produced, it's conceived, it's designed by the platform, than a complementary good coming from another ecosystem. It is exactly the issue of interoperability that Simonetta Vezzozzo described in our last seminar. And the very last point, in order to push or to hinder in innovation, is confirmation. I can provide the technical help to ensure the interoperability, or on the contrary, I can degrade the quality of the service, I can degrade the capacity of my competitor to make upgrades and so on. So you see, it is something like self-preferencing, in fact, but applied to the adoption of innovations, to the adoption of complementary services. So I spoke about pushing innovation and impairing the diffusion of innovation. It is, in fact, the issue of dark pattern. Filippo and Thierry spoke about dark patterns in a previous seminar, for instance. A dark pattern can be both a bad nudge and a bad sludge. In fact, a nudge or a sludge aren't positive or negative by themselves. We have some good nudges, bad nudges, good sludges, bad sludges. What is a good nudge? It's something like a push in order to make you behave in the direction of your own interest. What is a bad nudge? Something like push you to behave contrary to your interest. It is something like an emotional pitch. You are an alcoholic if you see some advertising on wine or whiskey, perhaps you will be tempted to fall into your own addiction. It is a bad nudge, in fact. Sludge. A sludge can be positive. If you want to make something like, I do not know, a credit or something like that, imposing you to check if you have the capacity to reimburse and so on, is a sludge, is a friction, is a way to slow down the process of the decision, but it is positive for you. A sludge can be negative if it hinders you to adopt an option, to adopt a technology that is positive for you. In fact, these sludges, these nudges exploit consumer cognitive biases. You have the literature of Thaler, of Sunstein, and so on. That is to say, some bias about the statu quo, the preference for present, the aversion of losses, the primacy of by default setting, and so on. Just an example coming from the video games. If you want to download Fortnite from Epic Games, you cannot download Fortnite from Google Play Store. You are obliged to directly download the game. When you download this game, you have something like a 16-step process of security warnings of Google. Are you sure to download this game? Do you know that you produce some security risk, some privacy hazards, and so on? In fact, it is something like an accumulation of successive sludges. And if I am risk adverse, if I have no competencies, perhaps I will pass the first step the first gateway, in fact, but not the second, the third, and so on. So we have in the state a litigation of Epic Games against Google, a litigation of Epic Games against Apple. In fact, it is an issue of sludges. So the dark pattern, in fact, can pertain to emotional pitch, proposals, or sometimes the dark pattern can pertain only on the architecture of the website. The dark pattern can be used, in fact, to manipulate consumer choices, but it can be implemented to manipulate privacy choices, for instance. And we had a seminar 1 month ago, I think, from Natalia Bielova and Christiana Santos exactly on this point. How the ergonomy of the site, how the design of a website can produce bad decisions from users. So in fact, dark pattern, we have burgeoning, not burgeoning, we have the start of literature on dark pattern, which is, for instance, developed by Luguri and Strelevich from the University of Chicago, from the same lab than Filippo Lancieri. It is the Stigler Center of the University of Chicago. And Luguri and Strelevich demonstrated that hard dark patterns are not so efficient because they produce something like a consumer backlash. On the contrary, if you have some mild dark patterns, the consumer do not be aware of this dark pattern and do not react negatively. And what is very interesting in that quantitative research is that, in fact, the progressive degradation of the quality of a service in terms of privacy, in terms of security, in terms of the preservation of the liberty of choice is never seen by the user. That is to say, when you accept the clauses and when the provisions change, you do not revise your choices. And it is exactly the issue of a dark pattern. I will be very quick on the presentation of the different models of dark patterns for two reasons. The first one, I'm very long and I want to leave the floor to Eva. The second, you have the working paper on the CIRANO website, which is already available online. So do not hesitate to go on the paper to discover all the possibility to use dark pattern. For instance, just 2 words, you have here the case of sneaking. To sneak into the basket, that is to say, to add an additional item. You buy an item, but a second one is put in your basket, and you have to make you have to write quantity requested 0 and not 1. You have some techniques like bet and switch, that is to say, an offer which is very attractive at first, but when you consider all the conditions, is not so attractive, but you are attracted at first, and it is very costly to revise your decision to go on another website. You have a lot of interference, for instance. If I want to suppress my Zoom account, my personal Zoom account, in fact, the button in order to stop my account, in order to come back to a free account, is not visible when my screen is at 100%. I have to reduce the size of my screen 90% to see the button and to click. You have a lot of forced actions. You are obliged to register on the website to use the website. You have something like an emergency. You know, it is the last place the last seat on this plane, or you read on the website that Samantha from Vancouver has already booked one room in this hotel, and you have still only one room. So it is your last chance you have to use. So you have a lot of strategies to manipulate your behavior. The third point in consumer behavior is related on the imposition of unbalanced transaction conditions. Three examples, but 4 examples, sorry, but very, very quickly. The first one, the capacity to personalize prices, sorry. If I can know exactly what is the capacity to pay of a consumer, I can charge different prices on each consumer, and I can equal the price to the maximal capacity to pay to each consumer. I can extract all the consumer surplus. I can also make versioning methods. That is to say, I apply the same price, I charge the same price, but I adjust the quality of the good or the services sold. For instance, I'm not a gamer. That is to say, the graphical card or the graphic card of my computer is something that makes no sense for me, but I can pay the same price, but with a very, very low quality card. So you see, if I can, with the industry 4.0, adjust in real time my production to the capacity to assess the quality of the product of each consumer, I can maximize my profit. I can also manipulate transaction cost. It is a strategy of price partitioning, or to say pricing. What is the price partitioning? I can be aware of the fuel cost at the very end of the process. I do not know if the shipping costs are integrated in the price or not. I will discover this on the 8th screen, that is to say 15 minutes after. And like I prefer to not waste my time, I will accept. Drift pricing is something like that. In drift pricing, I discover the different component of the price very progressively. And in fact, I cannot able to compare the price on one website to another one. And there is also a lot of literature about consumer lock-in effects because of loyalty programs, because of switching costs, because issues in terms of complementary goods and services, and so on. So it was the big point on consumer protection. I will make just a glimpse on the case of competition protection. It is in fact how to use algorithm, how to manipulate price offers in order to make your market position the more solid, the less contestable, sorry, as possible. How to proceed? You can use algorithm, you can use data in order to make some nowcastings, that is to say, to predict the present, to identify market opportunities or market risk at the very inception. In fact, it is the literature about killer acquisitions, the literature about kill zones, and so on. We have also one concern additional, not in the field of unilateral practice, but in the field of coordinated practice. It is all the literature about algorithmic collusions and mainly tacit collusions. We'll speak about this point with Thierry in the next seminar, just in 1 week. So we have to regulate this. We have to find a way to address this issue, not only through ex post sanctions, because these sanctions can be considered as insufficiently can be considered of having an insufficient deterring effect, or can be sometimes unable to restore the conditions of the competition. That is to say, to correct the market image. And here I can leave the floor to Eva.
Thank you very much, Frédéric. So the key question is indeed, so how to regulate this algorithm, how to make algorithm detection for nudges, for sludges, for deception, voluntary maneuvers, and can AI be part of the solution? Can AI help to correct anti-competitive behaviors having harmful effect on consumers? So here in our papers, we say that yes, AI tool can be of some help and can be implemented by both regulators and consumers. So the first part will be the use of AI by the regulators. And we can have here two components, ex ante and ex post components. So ex ante use of AI by regulators, what does that mean? So concretely, it means that, for example, we could have validation procedures of the quality of algorithm. It could be called conformity by design. It could be also used for sectorial inquiries, for example. What does that mean? It means that we use and check the training data and play with them to identify potential bias. We could also ask new data set to check the performance of some algorithm and the quality of the model. And regarding the specific topic of collision of algorithm by algorithm, here we could have, like for safety, for example, and security, some stress test. So here the idea is to identify under what condition and what speed the competing firms' algorithm could converge towards an equilibrium. So it's the idea of having an incubator specifically for algorithmic collision. And we talk as well about audit of algorithm, audit of design architectures, because today platform, for example, have a normative effect. So the idea is perhaps ex ante the regulator could use AI and could use auditing procedure, validation procedures to also check the design of algorithm. So regarding the ex post verification by regulators, here we could be very inspired by what exists already in security, perhaps dark trace for machine learning. And here the idea is to use algorithm for market surveillance. Already in high frequency trading, we use pattern recognition. So the idea is really to detect strategies that would not make economic sense outside of abusive practices. So the idea here is to oblige company to demonstrate and to explain that the decisions that have been made. And it's the logic of comply or explain. So if we identify a pattern with machine learning, then we will ask the company to explain why this decision have been made. So the legal framework here is competition law. We could also combine this framework with consumer protection, mainly to tackle the challenge of discrimination. And here some center like the Stigler Center spoke about a presumption of consumer harm. And I think it's a very important topic because it's difficult to demonstrate the manipulative intent. So a presumption here could be very useful from a legal perspective because we tackle the challenge, we face the challenge of opacity of algorithm. So this is for the first part on the use of AI tools by the regulators. But the question is, can consumers do as well something? Can they also use AI to detect or counteract possible manipulations by firms? And if yes, how? So the first example is to use counter algorithm. But this is not obvious because, of course, you need knowledge, you need education, and the ability to perceive the manipulation of an algorithm is really difficult. So there is unequal access to countermeasures and ethical challenge, because of course not everyone could access this tool. So another possibility is to have distributed monitoring devices set by NGO. And the idea is really for both to emit false signals or to identify algorithmic strategy, but this is in practice, this raises some challenges. First, because opacity is part of the technology. Second, there is a huge asymmetry of information, asymmetry of performance. When you took the algorithm of Google or Facebook, they have so much computation power, so much data that there is an imbalance here and inequality. And of course, the ethical concern related to the use of counterfactual algorithm. So which framework should we shape, should we use, should we design for high-stake decision? And this is the question we try to address in the paper. And the idea was that self-assessment could be used for algorithmic risk. And this is section 4. Yes, so the scope is really focused on highly consequential decision related to prediction to recommendation with really potential irreversible consequences. Yes, the slide is good. And with a very low explicability of choices. So here, in these cases, we need a supervision and not only ex post mechanism, but also ex ante mechanism. So the goal is really to ensure a level playing field in competition law and to align the interest of all stakeholders. And the context is really a context of data-driven decision making by companies, because more and more decisions are automated. And here there is a key role of machine learning models. So here you have two components. Machine learning models, they can both assist human in taking better decisions. This is what we call the augmented intelligence, or the machine learning algorithm can also replace human being in decision-making process. And here the question is the level of autonomy of this decision-making process. This is what we call automatized intelligence in the paper. So here's a quick question is how fair, how transparent are the model, how interpretable they are regarding the training data, how reliable are the training data. And here, recently in May 2020, a paper was published that shows that without bad intent of the designer of algorithms, so algorithm can learn by themselves to manipulate prices when this strategy optimize investment. So here, potentially you can have new crimes that can appear. And algorithmic detection of algorithmic market manipulation may become an important area for regulators. So here is a question of transparency, the question of managing uncertainty, accountability of platform, explainability of algorithm, and commitment of all stakeholders was at the center of our papers. And therefore, we can go to the next slide. And therefore, we decided that the approach of a liberal paternalism was very interesting, because the idea was to make the platform accountable and to implement some internal control by the company so that they can demonstrate that they behave in a responsible way. In common law country, you have the notion of duty of care. So they can really prove and demonstrate that they were diligent in processing the data, in designing the architecture, in training the model, etc. And that could result to certification mechanism. So then the idea behind is really to bring a self-assessment tool that is also beneficial for the company, so that bring competitive advantage, that can increase the share values, and while protecting at the same time the long-term interest of all stakeholders. So the methodology we designed at the AI Transparency Institute started first on corporate digital responsibility, On responsible AI, so we use the questionnaire of the high-level group of experts of the EU Commission, and then we design the tool. So basically, we build a scoring system based on a questionnaire, taking into account the interest of all stakeholders. And the idea is that each company can use the questionnaire and then evaluate the level of maturity and performance, and then publish this tool towards the investors to get a better scoring on corporate governance, for example. Publish this tool to demonstrate that they behave well. So then it's create a positive cycle for everyone, because then so the company can demonstrate that there is no sludge or only positive sludge or positive nudge, and transparency on the data management, transparency on the design, if we can go to the next slide, perhaps I can show you the chart. Yes, so in this example, this is the first example on the data. So what does that show? So it reflects the quality of the control implemented in the company with regard to the source of the data, the quality of the data, how data are used, shared, what is the GDPR compliance. And the graph is stemmed from the score. You see behind, you will see a table, data sources, data quality, data sharing, and you have a scoring system here. So the table is based on the scoring for each item. So it allows the firm to be compared to a selected benchmark or an average of all the firm involved into the, the process. And then you can check many components: ethics, responsibility. Here you have the responsible AIs based on the EU Commission requirements. And as I say, it can be used for the financial rating of the company, to evaluate the internal management, the reputation of the company towards the stakeholders. And this is a logic of competition by comparison, because, for example, in the luxury market, if Richemont makes a test, for example, they will see where they stand compared to the competitors, and it will be a positive motivation to improve the scoring. And this is the idea of, creating a positive cycle. And it also supports CSS standards and norm. In France, you have some of them, and we could include this within this standard. So there is a logic here. Of course, a legal obligation to disclose, some internal procedure regarding responsible AI could also help towards this direction. So as a conclusion, in a nutshell, the risk of algorithmic manipulation raise concern about the occurrence of damage that may be detectable with a low probability, and which would be difficult to remedy with traditional ex post sanction. So therefore, our goal is really to prevent damages resulting from algorithm by the control of the data, of the design of algorithm, and mainly by companies. So to have preventive tools. And for us, this should be in part of the corporate social responsibility of the company. And they are really, it's in the interest of the company as well to develop internal control to tackle this challenge of ethics, consumer protection, and competitions. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. Perhaps Marina? If there is some questions, if you want to organize the debate.
From now, and maybe what about Nathalie and Thierry? They'll go on during the question?
Yes, Nathalie and Thierry will answer to the question and participate to the debate.
Yes, for sure. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe Frédéric, there are many questions in the chat, and maybe we could pick up some of them to have a general discussion.
Yes, I think it was at first a question from Javier Francisco Muangua from Bogota. Javier, I do not know if you want to intervene. Javier? Perhaps from Bogota to Curitiba, Vinicius Klein from the Paraná. No chance also with Vinicius. No Javier, no Vinicius. Some questions from the floor? The first one is always the most difficult one. I see my colleague and my co-author, Patrice Bougette. Patrice will be obliged to ask a question. Patrice, the floor is yours. And you have the choice without any nudge.
There is a question in the chat now. From,
perhaps Javier Francisco, do you want to intervene?
Oh, good morning. No, it's about the index. It's about the index of. So I want to know if the technical characteristics are in the same paper, or there are any other that you can recommend us for know how to do this. No, insist I am a lawyer, not engineer, so it's difficult. But in general, the question is about this that you have answered yet, is that if there are any algorithms from the authorities international of consumers, because it's difficult. We have a League of Consumers for protect the interests of consumers, and we don't know here that our national authority have anything like an algorithm that could make a research about the violation of the rights of the consumers. Thank you very much.
So our methodology is published online. So regarding the questionnaire, you can find online all the questionnaire. We will also publish the one that is specific to this paper on algorithmic manipulation. It will be also published, I think, in January. But it's based on a questionnaire. It's not based on natural language processing, for example. It's not an algorithm is not used automatically to identify some issue intentionally so far.
Thank you very much.
So Vinicius has just left our house. I received a mail. So the floor is to Patrice in English, in French, or in Occitan, as you want. So more generally, feel free to intervene in French if you prefer, or in English, or even in Occitan. So Patrice, you are obliged to intervene in Occitan.
In English, it would be okay.
Better?
Yeah, but maybe better. Yeah, maybe Frédéric, can you go back to the use of behavioral economics?
The slide, okay.
Yeah, on the slides.
I have to
talking about
find my slide. Is it the good one?
Not, this is your mail.
No, it is not a good one, in fact. I will try to find the slide. It is a method in order to avoid to present the slide back and to have your question, in fact. So what slide, Patrice?
The one about nudge versus sludge.
Okay, this one, if you want.
Yes, exactly. On exploiting consumers' cognitive biases, do you have any example of these in Untitled cases related to AI?
Yes, yes, just an example, and after I will leave the floor to Nathalie and Thierry. For instance, the statu quo bias. When you have some by default settings on operating systems and so on, the consumer tends to prefer the statu quo, even if the statu quo is a suboptimal one. But perhaps Nathalie and Thierry for this point, because you are the experts on this topic.
Well, no. I mean, you said it very well, and I think in our daily lives, we encounter a lot of these issues. I mean, there is a difference in terms of the volume of information we have as a consumer compared to the volume of information that the supplier has. So it creates a lot of interesting patterns. I mean, not to mention my personal weekend, but this weekend I tried to to fight with a website, and it was definitely this kind of bias. If I may, I just want to go back to the previous question about algorithms. It's a very big discussion, and it would be great to have algorithms over the counter that competition authorities could use. But it's extremely complicated. Even nowadays in computer science, people are debating over should we put actually all the. So as you know, I mean, it's a matter of models and a matter of data. So and those two dimensions are very different, in fact. So and should we use all the data we have as a company, or should we anonymize some of the data if we don't want to be unethical? And ethics can be defined in, as you know, in many different ways across the world. So as a giant tech company, I mean, how do you define ethics, and do you find a bottom line for every country, every sub-regions across the world? And as a competitive authority, I mean, so what do you want in your data, and what do you want in your algorithms, in fact? So, and what would you recommend actually, and what you would impose on firms in terms of data collection? So it's as you know, I mean, and on this Zoom, I mean, I see people who are more expert than I am on this issue. So it's a very big deal, and you have in the computer science literature actually two trends. One is we should pseudo-anonymize, or we should anonymize. It's a minority, in fact, and one is no, we should actually take as many data, as many variables, as many features as we can. Otherwise, we may end up as a human, in fact, deciding which variables should be part of the estimation in a recommender system, for instance. But we would also bring our own biases. And some variables can be multicollinear with another variables like gender, race, and so on. So a majority of the papers in the computer science literature are actually calling for even unethical variables if you want, but so that we know actually we don't use a zip code instead of a gender variable, but zip code and gender, I mean, or a race are totally collinear. So it's better actually to, as a human, exposed to know actually, and to see that in your face, if I may say. So it's a question about algorithms regulating or assessing. I mean, it's a big debate, and it's also, and we are not yet there, but we are getting there. I mean, following the literature, and also the debate on the data. It's particularly interesting and complicated by the different cultures across the world.
Perhaps one question which was on the chat about high-stake decisions. Nathalie or Thierry, if you want to add some points on this issue. Perhaps Thierry on high-stake decisions on the specific treatments. I have no sound.
No, it's okay. I can hear you, Fred.
Okay. Thierry, perhaps about high-stake decisions, we had a question on the chat.
Yes. So
sorry.
I lost you. I'm sorry. So so for 10 seconds I was frozen. So high-stake decisions. I mean, it's interesting because in decision science or in risk analysis, people talk about catastrophic risks, and in computer science, people talk about high-stake decisions. So they are kind of similar concepts. So what is it? So a catastrophic risk, I mean, as you know, it's a low probability and a high consequence. And if you keep that in mind and you transpose that to computer science, so people in computer science are looking at high-stake decisions because this is what matters most. And as you know, I mean, in the US, some algorithms have been used to actually help judicial decisions, and so that's one example. And it's a high-stake decision. So it's and in other domains it would be a high risk, I mean, catastrophic risk based decision. So high-stake decisions in computer science, it's a starting field. It's a very interesting one. Because as I said in my first comment, I mean, it's really a burgeoning field. I mean, so it's big issues, big questions about data, big questions about models, and computer scientists know they cannot tackle everything. So this is why actually they are focusing right now on high-stake decisions, like judicial decisions, like public policies, like competition policies. And consider actually decisions that have a low probability of realization but high damages. So that's what is high-stake decisions.
Perhaps, sorry, Nathalie.
No, sorry, for me it was the same. I couldn't go back on my phone, sorry. So I just want to add something important, you know, and I think it will make the link between why we propose the tool, you know, because it's important to say that we have two parts in our paper. You know, one is more related to the impact and the risk for the consumer. The other one is the risk for the competitors, and to know how to regulate and control, you know, the use of algorithms. I am professor at Polytechnique Montréal, so it's an engineering school, and I worked a lot with the researchers who develop such algorithms, you know. And most of the time when we talk, they say that when they develop such algorithms, they want to do it for good, you know, they want to help, they want to optimize processes. And they say that most of the time, you know, these algorithms could be changed and could be used, you know, for not so good thing. And it could have an impact on their reputation and also about the reputation of the research center or the reputation of the companies, for instance. And I think it's important to say, okay, we can regulate, you know, we can have a kind of regulation, but in our case, it's more like a regulation by information. In fact, we just want the companies first to self-assess, you know, their own risks, you know, and just to have this kind of framework. And as I said at the beginning, we work on responsible AI. That means that we try to help, you know, the developers to take into account the bias that Thierry was talking about just before, because sometimes they don't really know. It will depend on the data used to train the algorithm. So this is the first part, I think, really important. And the second one is just for them to have like a framework to try to identify, so first to audit themselves, but at one point, you know, they could respond to questions. And as I said, you know, I think sometimes they don't even think about such things, you know. And at one point we were talking about data, for instance, and data is really the really most important part in these discussions. And I think just the sovereignty of data, where do they put the data centers, for instance, and just because of that, in Quebec, for some time we are thinking, do you have data centers in Quebec? And you can say yes, because we have a low price for electricity. So really important for us to have that kind of data centers. But in fact, we know that we worked a lot with US companies, and it's completely different in terms of data management and data regulation. And so it's the first thing, and they didn't think about that first, you know? So I think it's important, just before thinking about kind of regulation, we put emphasis about the kind of risk that could happen. And I think first step will be to have a sensibilize, you know, these developers first, and the company that use algorithms, you know, because I think it's exactly the same in Europe, but now we just try to use AI for many kinds of applications. And it's just the way they want to use AI, but they have no idea about all the kind of process, the data used, and the way it could be applied, and the bias. So I think it's important, and it's the first step. That's why we were really interested working all together, because we bring this kind of issues we can have, and bringing also people who develop these algorithms could help, you know, to better understand the process, but also from the legal point of view, or for the regulation point of view, can bring them some kind of issues that could be really, if we don't try to assess them, or if we assess them at the beginning, you know, could be too late at the end, because it's a learning process, you know, and the first data are, I think, the most important ones.
Excellent. Thanks, Nathalie. Some additional questions? Perhaps I will ask one question to Eva, Thierry, and Nathalie. A question of economist, pure economist in competition law. The difference and the capacity to have a transparent AI, an accountable AI, or an explainable AI. That is to say, is transparency a myth? And if we have no transparency, is the explainable AI the same thing than an accountability of AI? That is to say, how to define these different concepts. I have this difficulty between primarily accountability, explainability. That is to say, is accountability only the fact to explain what is the result, or what could be the parameters that make the result that can make the result different. I see the limits of my English. Eva or Nathalie?
Yes, I mean, it's a question that is already that is very debated in the doctrine at the moment. So yeah, for me, accountability is both a moral and a legal obligation, moral liability. So, and explainability, it's more from the technical side, how to make transparent the decision-making process. And now in the research, more and more industry just invest time in building interfaces to explain, enabling the system to explain why, for example, it turns to right or left, for which reason, so that ex post, if you need the information, you can just find the information. But for me, the most important thing is not that. For many systems today, we don't always understand how they work, but what is important is the liability scheme and the insurance scheme. So in the event of a damage, algorithmic damage, who is responsible, who will pay? So what is the insurance scheme that will be in place? For me, that are really the important question at the moment. And I know some reports have been published at the EU Commission. So, I mean, there is a heavy debate on this question. It's another topic. Thank you.
Thanks, Eva. We have two questions in the chat. The first one from Jan Gutmann. Jan, do you want to intervene? Jan, do you hear us? Or perhaps first Jeanne? Alors, so I will just present the question of Jan, which is related to the news, and a researcher from Google who was fired this weekend because of her works. What to interfere from this case in terms of research on the field of responsible AI? Is it possible to implement a research within firms or outside firms? That is to say, how to think about this difficulty from regulating from inside. That is to say, to have within the society something like a procedure of alert. Perhaps Nathalie?
It's a good question, and it's not so easy to respond, as I said, because it's a complex. When we talked about explainable AI, and it's really a trend now, everybody said that we need that because otherwise it will be difficult to regulate, but also to find responsible people for that. But it's not so easy because, as I said, that's why we are trying to make necessary condition at the beginning of that, because at the end, so easy to understand. There will be, it's a learning process, as I said, it will be a lot of layers to understand, and that's why we use algorithms, because it's not possible to do it, ourselves. So even if we want to understand the process and all in the trees, all the possibilities, yes, and how it will arrive to the end, it's not so easy. So it's not just to find out the result and to say this is a response person or the people that should be fired in that case, but it's more to understand why, that could happen at the end. That means that why they didn't put barriers at the beginning or during the process to avoid such things to happen. So I think it's more that, because even if we try to do an explainable AI, and we know that if we will use at one point, for instance, that kind of algorithms in industries like airplane, autonomous airplane, we'd want to know and to understand, if an accident will happen, because people could die, so it's even worse. And they know that at that point, it's impossible for them to use such AI, just because they will not be able to explain if something happened, why. And this is the point, So at that time, for us, and for when we talked about consumer and price, maybe impact, for sure it's important, but we can live, with such kind of variation, and we will try to put like of barriers of that, but we can see that it's not so easy.
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Nathalie. A question from Jeanne. Jeanne, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Very, very interesting. Thank you very much. Maybe I have a question for Ms. Thelisson. As you spoke about the self-assessment tools, I'm thinking of the worst case scenario. So best case scenario, they use this tool to improve their ethics, to improve consumer protection, to improve competition. Worst case scenario, what if they use this tool to assess the risk and internalize the risk, and just maybe anticipate the fine that could be applied on them because they didn't respect, they didn't comply with every regulation that could be assessed with this index. Worst case scenario, not the best word, but what open question if you have any ideas about that.
The idea of the index, if I may, I don't know, Frédéric,
Yes.
The idea is to assist the company in identifying the risk, the maturity level as well, and to bring the proof that they've done something, that they are compliant. And the final objective is to get a certification. So in this example, worst case scenario, it would mean that they identify the risk, they internalize the risk, they put a provision, for example, for risk, because they just accept the risk like that. With GDPR, it could be the case. They could save 20 million. So the question then is that they would not get a certification. So compared to their competitors, perhaps they would lose some market shares, or perhaps, you know, the risk of reputation will not be covered. And yes, it's of course an option that is plausible. But on the long term, if we are optimists and we consider that the competitors will adopt this tool and will publish the result, and it will be part of the scoring of their corporate governance, so some investor may withdraw their share participation in this kind of companies. I don't know if you have seen, but Ethos Foundation in November published an engagement papers. Ethos is a huge pension fund, and they decided to invest in multinational in Switzerland only if some conditions are fulfilled. So it means that if other pension funds, you know, follow, it will become a basics for investors to check what is the scoring system for AI transparency, for AI responsibility. And this is our hope, that it will discourage this kind of, you know, worst case scenario, as you mentioned, because we create economic incentives to align the interest of all stakeholders. So that's the idea, and we're optimistic. And regarding perhaps the firing of Dr. Gabriel, I can tell you I'm a member of the editorial board of AI and Ethics at Springer Journal. There is huge mobilization, and it's just the start, I think. And the question, of course, of the culture of the company is a massive one. So if we internalize ethics in AI within an organization, I think can only be successful if the culture of the company is aligned with this awareness and self will to move on in this direction. Otherwise, it will be difficult.
Thanks, Eva. Perhaps one question from Javier Mongua. Javier?
Professor, no, it's about an economic also question. Is this: have we arrived to the point of the perfect discrimination? So to say that if the manipulation of algorithms is leading us to the perfectly individualized market offers? Is a question that is more than of engineering, is of economics.
Maybe I can
yes.
I can jump in. So we have a paper to finish actually with Frédéric on this issue. So the answer is yes, but not for every company. So it requires a lot of data, so some sophisticated models, in fact, to be able to do it. So it raises the question of what about the invisible hand? I mean, our capitalist societies were working with the invisible hand and aggregated demand and aggregated supply. So it was working, and you did not get a lot of, as a company, the only value of information you would get would be the price and the aggregated quantity. So that was the value of information you would get. Now, if you have access to massive data on your consumers, and I would encourage you to actually read a book by Marco Iancitti and Karim Lakhani from Harvard Business School about competing in an age of AI, explaining that every company should become a data-based business model company. So if you have access to massive data, and if you buy companies because they have data and so on, I mean, so if you think about the dynamics of this industry, then you achieve actually perfect price discrimination. And but again, it requires a lot of financing, a lot of acquiring companies and so on. So it's big, it's huge. I mean, you need to be a very big company, and this is which raises a question anyway. I mean, what about competition? So if some giants can do that across the world, but the rest of the industries cannot do that, I mean, well, it raises also some other interesting questions.
Yes, if I may also, in specific field like the insurance field, in common law countries, you have now really a premium that is based on the risk for each person. So the premium will vary from one day to another, depending on the data analytics that is made on each person. And this raises also some question about solidarity, because insurance models in Europe are based on solidarity. And even if someone is sick, has a strong disease, I mean, there is a solidarity system from the premium that might disappear completely with this data-driven insurance. So depending on the field, the impact, social impact, might be huge. In addition, of course, the competitive market and competition.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
And if I may, so just to throw actually a crazy thing, some of these models are wrong. So companies hire actually a couple of people, they build a data science team, and suddenly they change actually the business aspect of a product based on recommendations from these models, and it may work, but it doesn't mean the models are right. So I mean, I don't have actually, so it's just my intuition, but training a lot of these students and so on, I mean, yeah, I'm pretty sure actually a lot of these models are not validated the way we would like them to be validated in research. So we are still, and it's normal. I mean, Yoshua Benjo and Jeff Hinton and Yann Lequin in 2012 publishing the paper that is the most known actually in deep learning, but they published this paper in other formats before. But it's really 2012 that suddenly actually the AI thinking got into the business world little by little. So we are just at the beginning, and so it's normal that models can be wrong even if the bottom line goes up for a company. But other company will arrive, will design other models, better models, and so on, and the bottom line of the first company will go down because they will realize it's wrong. But it's something to keep in mind. I mean, AI can also be modeled in a wrong way. So they may make statistical mistakes. And a big shift is in Bayesian thinking and not in inferential statistics like we've been taught in the past. So, so it's a very interesting moment. And that's also why we think, and also because, I mean, you're in Europe, you are in Colombia, we are in Canada. So North American perspective, so the legal tradition versus the European tradition. So it's all interesting stuff. And human beings in North America obviously don't have the same culture as human beings in Europe. So so self-assessment may be a little more respected maybe in North America than it is in other parts of the world, and so on. So it's all interesting.
Thank you very much to Professor Warin and Professor Thelisson. Thank you very much.
Is there other questions? No? Perhaps Marina for the conclusion? You're muted, Marina.
J'étais désolée. Oui, désolée. Puisque tu as dit qu'on pouvait formuler quelque chose en français, ouais, j'aimerais juste partager, c'est même pas une idée, mais un sentiment. Toute cette présentation me rappelle ce que nos et vos collègues canadiens du laboratoire de cyberjustice font en utilisant en fait des outils de la technologie dans le traitement du contentieux. Et Karim Ben-Yeklef explique finalement ce mouvement en disant un contentieux qui est né sur Internet ne peut trouver sa bonne solution qu'à partir d'Internet. Et là, on a un petit peu la même idée, c'est-à-dire qu'un problème qui est né intrinsèquement dans des algorithmes ne peut trouver finalement que son traitement idéal à partir d'une solution qui sera elle-même de nature algorithmique. Moi, un sujet qui m'intéresse, Et du coup, je ne sais pas s'il y a de la littérature de votre côté de l'Atlantique. C'est évidemment la question des conflits d'intérêts. Parce qu'à un moment donné, il va y avoir évidemment une course qui n'est plus du tout une course juridique dans la détection des pratiques, mais qui est tout simplement une course strictement d'ordre technologique. Et donc, ce qui arrivera vraisemblablement, c'est qu'on aura les mêmes acteurs qui proposeront les solutions software aux entreprises et puis qui proposeront les solutions côté RegTech, côté SupTech aux régulateurs. Et ça, évidemment, c'est très problématique sous l'angle des conflits d'intérêts. Moi, je n'ai pas lu énormément de choses côté, on va dire, Europe continentale. Est-ce que vous, de votre côté, à vous, est-ce qu'il y a des choses là-dessus, sur ces questions-là?
Alors, je vais peut-être commencer. Dans la culture nord-américaine, c'est pris très au sérieux. Et on a de nombreuses conversations à ce sujet-là. Et c'est vrai que ça s'accélère avec l'implantation de modèles en intelligence artificielle, en fait. Et notamment ce qu'on appelle les keynotes, les plateformes digitales dominantes, en fait. Donc, effectivement, mais c'est une question qui est très, très prise au sérieux en Amérique du Nord, à travers les différents États aux États-Unis et les provinces canadiennes, définitivement. Mais à nouveau, la réponse, elle est dans la culture nord-américaine, elle est dans le système légal juridique, la tradition juridique nord-américaine, qui est différente de l'Europe. Donc, mais il faut bien le comprendre. Enfin, je pense qu'il faut bien le comprendre, et je pense que vous connaissez ça mieux que moi, les deux traditions juridiques, notamment, enfin, je dis deux, il y en a beaucoup plus, mais en réalité, donc, on parlerait de bottom-up et top-down. Et il y a des choses, et voilà, c'est pour ça que c'est compliqué, parce qu'il y a des choses qui fonctionneront mieux peut-être en Amérique du Nord, il y a des choses qui fonctionneront mieux en Europe. Donc, je ne pense pas qu'il y ait une solution universelle, vu les différentes cultures et traditions juridiques. Mais en même temps, tout ce que je peux vous dire, c'est que oui, c'est absolument la question du conflit d'intérêts, elle est très importante en Amérique du Nord. Tout ce qui est due diligence, enfin les conflits d'intérêts font partie du due diligence.
Si je peux me permettre de compléter, je pourrais dire l'apparence aussi de conflit d'intérêts. Tu sais, ça, c'est très important souvent parce que tu sais, on dit oh, on n'a pas de conflit d'intérêts et tout ça, mais l'enjeu dans ce contexte-là, c'est l'apparence et c'est aussi néfaste en termes de gestion de la réputation et des risques que le conflit d'intérêts lui-même. Tu sais, on pourrait prouver qu'il n'y en avait pas, mais les parties prenantes, c'est pour ça que souvent on me dit ben, comment on peut éviter, tu sais, on me dit ben, tu sais, tu dis non, tout est fait correctement, mais il y a une apparence. Et moi, je sais qu'au quotidien, je gère beaucoup de l'apparence de conflit d'intérêts dans certains gros projets sur lesquels je travaille avec le gouvernement, parce qu'il n'y en a pas, on le sait, tout le monde est éthique dans son comportement et tout ça, mais on pourrait penser que, et c'est beaucoup plus, c'est aussi difficile. Alors, je pense que c'est un sujet qui, à mon avis, va permettre aussi cet aspect-là, parce que parfois, comme je dis tout à l'heure, la plupart des développeurs ou la plupart des collègues, en fait, sont de bonne foi. Tu vois ce que je veux dire, ils sont dans un contexte où, comme on dit, la culture est différente des côtés et l'autre de l'Atlantique et tout ça. Les approches sont un peu différentes, mais la notion d'apparence de conflit pourrait être un point important à regarder.
Eva ?
Oui, c'est vraiment un sujet central. On en a beaucoup discuté l'an dernier. L'enjeu, c'est celui du financement, en fait. C'est celui du financement qui évite justement ce type de conflit d'intérêt ou cette apparence de conflit d'intérêt qui pourrait mener à un dommage de réputation. Et c'est pour ça qu'on a choisi, nous, de travailler avec des fonds d'investissement qui, eux, permettent d'éviter ces conflits d'intérêts. On a aussi pris contact avec la Commission européenne pour discuter avec eux de potentiels financements publics pour créer une sorte d'autorité d'audit public. Là encore, pour ne pas dépendre de financements privés de la part de multinationales et autres, et pour éviter justement ces conflits. Après, quand on regarde le fonctionnement des agences de notation, par exemple, on se rend bien compte en pratique qu'effectivement, il y a des conflits d'intérêts. L'histoire nous montrait avec Enron, le scandale Enron, cumuler les fonctions d'audit et de conseil, ça peut aussi être problématique. Donc, effectivement, c'est une question absolument centrale et pour être pérenne et durable, je pense que les instituts qui vont offrir des outils qui soient technologiques ou non, bon, peu importe, mais de certification vont devoir régler cette question et démontrer leur indépendance.
D'autres questions en français ou en anglais? En occitan ou en catalan, on prend. Non? Donc il ne nous reste plus qu'à... Alors peut-être non, Marina, je vais te repasser la parole parce que je ne vais pas me remercier.
Alors moi, je vais te remercier,
Voilà.
Frédéric. Et puis surtout, tous tes co-auteurs, hein, Nathalie, Eva, Thierry, un grand merci. Je remercie aussi Marion, qui est au pilotage de toutes nos manifestations. Donc, merci aussi à toi et puis nos étudiants et puis les habitués aussi qui reviennent à chacun des séminaires. Donc ça aussi, c'est assez fantastique de se dire que finalement, de cette crise, il en sort quand même quelque chose d'assez incroyable avec Zoom. C'est que là, on arrive à tous se parler, hein, d'Amérique latine, du Canada, de l'Europe et même de l'Allemagne, tout à l'heure avec Anne. Donc voilà, ça sera peut-être le seul côté positif de cette crise sanitaire. Et puis, Frédéric, peut-être là, je te rends la parole pour les prochains séminaires, parce que je n'ai plus forcément les dates en tête.
Alors, ça sera le 15. Alors, le 15, bien entendu, je ne sais pas quel jour ça tombe, c'est mardi. Donc, dans 9 jours. Là, nous allons avoir une rencontre avec notre chaire, plus celle de Toulouse et celle d'Ottawa. Hein, donc, avec Céline Casté-Renard, qui est à l'Université d'Ottawa, et avec, je crois, Jessica Reynard, peut-être, je ne sais plus si Jessica est encore avec nous, je ne me souviens plus de notre famille. C'est-à-dire, nous aurons un ensemble de présentations. Alors, donc, la présentation de l'ouvrage de Céline, une présentation commune de Ronan et Jessica, mais alors j'ai oublié les noms de famille, honte à moi, autour d'un travail qui est fait sur les identités numériques, si mes souvenirs sont bons. Ensuite, deux présentations, je qualifierais d'internes, celle de Julie, et ensuite une avec Thierry, où on va parler ce coup-ci de collusion algorithmique et de modèles de signaux. Voilà, donc ça c'est au programme de la semaine prochaine. Et après, nous partirons vers des vacances bien méritées.
Ouais.
Je pense.
Bien. Écoutez, un grand merci à tous.
Merci beaucoup. Hein.
Merci à
Et
tout
puis,
le monde.
au plaisir de poursuivre la réflexion sur ces sujets.
Au revoir à tous.
Merci,
À
au revoir.
bientôt.